It's recording.
Okay, it's recording.
Is this?
Yes, it is. I see the thing.
Okay.
Okay. So thanks for being super flexible about our debrief time. I know we meant to do this. We wanted to get this done as soon as possible. But like, thanks for traveling, all of those things. So I just wanted to like kick it off. It was so good to be in your classroom. No, really. I mean, you've made a ton of growth since the beginning of the school year. I know you worked really, really hard on classroom management and culture. I hope that you see the growth and progress that you've made with your kids.
Absolutely. It's like completely different. It's like night and day. And even now, I just see a difference in both like my students' classroom behavior and then like their educational like desires. Like they want to be on task. They like, it's very like self-motivated. Like I don't have to tell the kids to be quiet. Other kids will be like, hey, we're doing something. Can you please bring it down? Like, so that's really refreshing because it takes a lot of the work off me and I can actually teach and they kind of manage it.
Yeah. So I want to give you like some data points of like the amount of growth you made since yesterday. So since the beginning of the school year till yesterday. So yesterday you gave, in the 30 minutes that I was there, you gave 5 whole class like directions. And each of those times you had like over 80% of the kids immediately follow your direction before you narrated or before you gave consequences. Yes.
That's like major, because I feel like before I would have to give like 80 class directions and I had like
maybe a reset.
Yeah.
So like no, you've made like so much growth. And like you've also made progress with like your overall like lesson plan and the way that you're facilitating like your lesson in general. So like that's what we're gonna jump into today and like talk about like what this actually looked like yesterday. So tell me a little bit about yesterday's lesson and actually specifically how you chose the text you focused on for your figurative language standard.
Okay, so what we were working on is figurative language and we're working through our poetry unit because they actually, tomorrow will start their essays where they will compare a story and a poem that have the same theme. So we spent a lot of time working on theme and breaking down the plot of a story to understand theme, and then we moved and I purposely decided to separate working on poetry and working on literature because they are so vastly different, even though some of the literary elements cross with my kids and where they are and knowing where they are with a lot of the literature standards. I really wanted to make sure that they had theme and plot and all those things down and then move on to a different type of text that we had encountered. So I decided to pick It's a Cloudy Days by Wadsworth. It is a way below level text, but giving background on my kids, and you know this, they're low because they haven't had a consistent teacher. So where they're, a lot of them, in fact, probably 75% of my class is not on grade level. So in the past, I've started with a grade level text and tried to teach them a literary element, and there was just a disconnect because they would kind of understand the literary element, but because the text was for some kids like super advanced of where they are, even though it's where they should be, there was kind of like a disconnect. So I started probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, starting with a lower level text where I could really just hone in on the strategy or the skill that I'm teaching. And once I knew that they had that, move up to the grade level text. And I have seen improvement because they've been able to say like, oh, I know how to do this. So even though the wording or the language may have changed, I know what I'm doing.
So it sounds like, and just want to make sure that I'm clear, you're choosing your text because you're like noticing a gap between where like your scope and sequence is requiring students to be and like where your students actually are.
Absolutely.
So when you think about the lesson that you gave yesterday, or specifically the text you pulled, you mentioned the Wadsworth text. It was also like 2 other really short texts. So if you think about like the way you introduce figurative language, and if we gave students an assessment on figurative language with an on grade level text, do you think that they would be able to like show mastery based on yesterday's lesson?
I don't think they'd be able to show mastery. We definitely will probably need to do another day to get to mastery, but I do think there would be at least some proficiency. Some kids would still be in that basic area or not be able to get it, but I do think that they would be able to get the basics. They may get tripped up by the text because we are focusing in texts that are much lower, but I do think there would be at least some type of proficiency of maybe, if I'm asking them to gather maybe 3 or 4 literary elements, that maybe they'd be able to get 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I think like the big push in that is that even if they were able to show mastery in today's text, the way personification looks, or specifically you use personification, simile, and metaphor in yesterday's lesson. So let's be like even concrete, like the ease to find a metaphor in a lower level text. So like that Wadsworth text, I like pulled its Lexile level. It was a 3rd grade Lexile level. So the ease in finding a personification in a 3rd grade text is going to look very different than it would look in a 6th grade text. So My hypothesis would be that actually if we gave students a 6th grade text, they may struggle immensely to like pull out the same skill that they were able to pull out in a 3rd grade text. And I want to be clear that like we've seen the kids' data. Like I know that your kids need additional support, but like being really strategic around like when we use that additional support. So I saw you doing like a whole class lesson. That is when, regardless of where our kids are, we want to be using on grade level text during this whole class lesson. When I come in and I like observe, pop into your classroom doing like small group work, station group work, that's when I want you to be using the skill that you're like currently leaning on, of like starting with a lower level text and then eventually scaffolding them up. Like why do you think it would be important to like focus on grade level text whole group and then lower level text during like the small group or like station work?
I think that the goal there is that the whole class is getting that grade level exposure, especially for my higher level kids. I do have kids that are on grade level or above grade level, so that they're not feeling like they're kind of like bogged down, like, oh my gosh, it's a personification, it's a metaphor. But then also that exposes the kids that they know what the task is. So then if I pull them in small group, it's like, hey, that might have been a lot for you, but let's break it down with something that I know we can get, and then let's see if we can find the similarities.
Absolutely. And like what it also will do for you, Julia, is that right now you're like making a guess. Like I guess that maybe they'll be able to show some proficiency, right? But if you actually use an on grade level text, we will actually be able to say concretely, when I look at like a text, like a rigorous text, my kids can do it or they can't do it. And then we'll be able to plan accordingly. We can't really plan well when we're not using a text that's on grade level. So that's what we're gonna like push our work next. So the ultimate goal is that like we're going to make sure that we're giving kids a text that is on grade level and rigorous enough so that we actually are able to see if they're advancing the standard, if they're like close to mastery, and like what that means for like your work as a teacher. So as you reflect on that and like your practice that you naturally chose to make the decision to pull like a lower level text, what are even some ideas you have about like changing this aspect in like your whole group lesson? Like what are you thinking you could potentially do?
I'm definitely going to make sure that I'm pulling grade level poetry, because I think that grade level literature, they have a different understanding than grade level poetry. But then also maybe making sure that my exit tickets, that is one thing that I noticed, and I was struggling with that a little bit when I looked at the exit ticket. That did have grade level text on it, and they did not perform as well as I thought they would, because in the whole group lesson and when I was doing my informal assessments and things like that and question discussion, they got it. But specifically, I pulled a line of Shakespeare that was a personification, and the majority of them said it was a metaphor. And so like understanding that like once the text level was amped and like the language was changed and it wasn't plain language, that there was that disconnect. But then like there was a thing that I noticed, like all of them knew what a simile was, with that, because it's naturally a simile is easier to pick out because it has key distinct words that you're looking for. So one, understanding that like if I'm gonna ask them to do something in an exit ticket, and this is something I was reflective on like later today, like make sure that I'm asking them to do that in the lesson so that they've
had time to practice.
Yes, so they're not like thrown off when they're like, whoa, like you're asking me to do something, but like I've never seen it like this before.
Yeah, it also sounds like in order to get to where you want to be at your exit ticket, to give them this, like our texts have to get progressively more challenging throughout the day. So like I'm introducing it to them at a certain level. We're then doing some whole class practice at this level. You're then having some individual practice at this level. I'm doing some checks for understanding, and then we're having an exit ticket. So like students are set up ultimately for success by the end of your lesson. So if we actually use that type of like sequence, right? Like throughout one lesson, students are seeing a text get more rigorous. How would that increase the efficacy of like how you were able to deliver your lesson today?
I'm thinking that if I had scaffolded it in that manner, I still would have gotten the engagement and the retention that I got with the lower level text, but it also would have, for those students that would have struggled with it, it would have given them an opportunity to see other students who are understanding it and get that group knowledge, and then be able to ask me questions whole group about where the disconnect is. Because in small group, obviously I'm going to be pulling kids who like are needing that so much, so they're going to be in a setting with other students at their same level. But I think there's always greatness in like allowing other kids to see kids that do have it and how they break down their process. But then it also allows me to get a better read of like where my whole class is. So like how many kids got it and can do it and can move on and do something independently. How many kids are going to need that remediation, that pullback. Like how many kids are really, really struggling, and like we really need to think about how to get them to get the skill.
Yeah, that's like super smart. And I'm happy to see that like you see why this would be beneficial, because it's also going to give you that immediately. So if you start introducing, whether you're doing like a literary text or fictional text or poetry, when you start at one level and then you're like scaffolding up, you're also able to anecdotally see like when are certain students no longer able to like engage, right? So you're getting some data throughout your lesson so that like as you're even using proximity to check in with students, or when they go to like group time or independent time, you're checking in with students like literally based on like when that student was able to like stop participating in that day's lesson, and then getting some like concrete exit ticket data at the end of the day. So I want to like push us forward because like you seem like you know where we're going with this, right? And that is important. So let's consider what this could have looked like today. So you pulled the Wadsworth poem. That's like how we introduced to them like this idea of personification. We know that was on the 3rd grade reading level, and like that's not going to be ultimately helpful for your kids. So we could have started with like an on grade level poem. I did hear you though mention that like part of it is like the level of complexity, and the part of it is the length, right? So like as you're thinking specifically about poetry, like one thing we could consider is what would it look like to give your students an on grade level poetry, but actually give them one stanza. So you're introducing them the idea of personification just with one stanza, and then when they move to their whole class practice, you're now giving them 2 stanzas. And then when they move to their independent practice, they now have like 4 stanzas, right? So they're seeing the same text. They already have like the theme and the context, the other things that stop you from focusing on the skill of personification, because you have to make sure that you understand what is happening. But you're able to get to what you want of like, hey, I'm supporting my students and breaking this down. However, it is an on grade level text that you're allowing them to work with consistently. Do you have any questions about that?
No, I think that's great because that's like the, since I am teaching 6th grade in elementary school, there are some things that they want us to do in terms of radiation. So they talk a lot about like, I do, we do, you do, which like technically in secondary is, you kind of move away from that because one, your blocks are short and things like that. But I think that would be really helpful for my students because I do notice when I do a lot of teacher models, they're focused and they get it because they're seeing my thought process, not just me throwing the answer up there, but like how I'm doing it. So I definitely feel like for that one stanza on grade level, that's the teacher model. Like I'm gonna go through this with you literally step by step of giving you like how I would do this. And now when we break into small groups, that gives an opportunity for my higher level students to just go and run with it because I know they're gonna do it. And then that gives me time to reach in with my students that are going to need that like more focal instruction. And then by the time they get to independent, they should be able to handle it a little bit more. Because that, even if I work with the same text, if I'm upping the amount of text I'm having them read, that is pushing rigor. Whether it's like moving from text to text or like within a text.
So tell me about what's the plan for tomorrow's lesson? What skill are you focusing on? What standard are you focusing on? And then like what text have you pulled?
So we are going into poetry because we're actually going to poetry and literature again because they're starting their essays. Okay. They're going to get the prompt for their essays, and actually both of these texts are on grade level. They are rigorous texts in the sense of one, like the language in them is very intense. One of them is culturally intense with language, so there's a lot of language that is like culturally probably like not on my kids' radar. It's set in like the desert in the Middle East, so like they're speaking like even like culturally like language of religion, so like Allah versus God, like those kind of things that might trip them up. And then with the poem, it's a free verse poem. It's written with Japanese culture background, so that'll be something to work with them. And I think it's 6 stanzas, so I definitely will be breaking down both stories with them. Both the story and the poem, and then with the poem, I really want to focus on that, like we said, that one stanza.
So versus like having you like meet with me and then go do that later, let's pull it up now. So let's look at the poem that you're going to use for tomorrow, and then in the action item that we decided on that we're going to like increase the amount of exposure that they're having to the same text. We're going to decide like when you're going to expose them to like what part of the text, like today. So let's go ahead and take a look at it.
Okay. So we want the poem.
Yeah.
Okay.
If that's the one you're going to start with?
Yeah.
Okay. Just let me know when you have that up.
Alright, so this is the poem. There's no good word for goodbye. So already, like, I'm seeing words that my kids are gonna be stressed about. So like Sequoia, that's a name, like Azkaban, Tala. Then also the structure of the poem, it doesn't rhyme, it's free verse, and so they do know what free verse is, but because it's free verse and then it's upped, and it has a lot of like big concepts. So there's a theme of loss here, and that's what they have to talk about in their essay. So I really have to make sure that they understand like what is the narrator saying, so that not only do they understand how the theme is portrayed, but then they can compare that to the theme in the story.
Yeah. So one thing I've noticed about your lessons is that you've actually been doing like a good job of strategically using like your warm up, like your do now. So like one idea that we could potentially do is like take this first stanza and actually have that be like your warm up, but without introducing any new skills. So if we just learned about simile, metaphor, personification, like what type of figurative language do you see in this poem? And you don't even have to tell them that it's a stanza out of a big poem. Like even if you just tell them this is a poem, like what do you see? How do you know? Like be specific, right? That will let you know. Since like yesterday we did not use it on grade level text, and now you did. That'll give you some instant beginning of the classroom data on like are they able to apply what they learned yesterday? Were they able to retain what they learned yesterday, right? When we're not walking through a whole class, and then using your teacher model to potentially do like these next two, right? So if you did that, then like what part of the text would you potentially give them for individual practice versus like group practice?
I think that for individual practice, in the way that the theme is developed through the poem, I think I would go first to teacher model, second to small group, and the last two for independent, because this is where the bulk of the theme is exposed to them. So I do still want, for my non-grade level kids, I do still want to make sure that they know where they're going, because if they get lost here, then they'll be off track for the bottom. And it's not more simply stated, but like as long as they get this here, then they should be able to progress forward.
Makes sense. And then we're going to pull, just want to make sure I'm explicit about this, like a different text for your exit ticket.
Yes.
And the idea is that like you want to like assess them on something that like they have not skilled, because we're like focusing specifically on that skill in that standard. Absolutely, right? So in order to implement this like skill of like making sure that like kids have on grade level texts that are like getting progressively longer and more rigorous, do you need any additional support from me to make this happen?
I think that I want to say I'll go tomorrow, because I'm pretty sure that like we've really debriefed it, but like if I have any red flags, so like I feel like at the end of the class my kids have no idea what this poem is saying and I have to like spell it out to them, then I might want to go into the strategies to help them break it down.
Absolutely. So recap for me, the change you want to make for tomorrow, why is it important?
Okay, so the change that I'm going to make for tomorrow is that I'm going to start and always have my kids' whole group in front of an on-grade level text. And then actually tomorrow what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick with them on the on-grade level text and then give them another on-grade level text in the exit ticket and break it down with teacher model, group do, and then independent work, but with the same text. So it's upping the rigor because it's upping the amount that they're reading, and the language changes vastly throughout the poem.
And then why are we making that change?
This is ultimately important because while my kids, there is a gap, I can't get accurate data on that gap if I don't see where they are like right in the beginning. And the way that my lesson plans are scaffolded, I still will have time if I need to if I need to pull out a third grade level text before we move into, I see a small group struggling, I can do that, but I want to try to push my kids at all times to keep them towards their grade level goals.
Yeah, that's super smart, and it sounds like you're like really clear on what we're doing next. So my plan is going to, since we looked at tomorrow's plan together, how about I pop it on Thursday? So because this is a skill that like now that we have, we're gonna make sure that we're implementing in every lesson. So then I can see Thursday's lesson and see if you're like able to do this like on your own. So like pull your own text, scaffold it through a lesson. And then we can like touch base on like, do we need to recap this or do we like need to move on and like work on something different?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Cruiser.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna like push.